On this episode, we wrap up No Rogan Experience Season 3. No Rogan Experience starts now. Welcome back to the show. It's a show where two podcasters now with 200 and some, it's more than 12, I thought, right?
It's 211 hours and 50 minutes
and
was
50
what I
minutes.
last had it at.
We are lying when we say it's a show where two podcasters with 212 hours.
Look, I round up or I round down to the nearest hour. There's times that I say we've done, 210 and we've done 210.29.
Okay,
and I
so
take the 29
most
away.
Of the time, listeners, we are lying. So I just want to let you know, this is a show where two podcasters now with 212 hours of Rogan experience get to know Joe Rogan. It's a show for those who are curious about Joe Rogan, his guests, and their claims, as well as for anyone who wants to understand Joe's ever-growing media influence. I'm Cecil Cicerello. That's Michael Marshall. Today, we're going to be covering our own season wrap-up, and so there's not much else to say. We're not going to introduce anybody. We're not going to talk about who we need to talk about this week. Instead, we're going to be talking about the season as a whole. So before we get to that, we want to say a thanks to our Area 51 All Access Pass patrons. That's Stone Banana, Marsh Cecil. It all started because I hate how people always stand too close. I wanted to find a way to stop that. Then I thought, hang on. Lucy Cortez, Megan Bray, Carissa Gunderson, Dr. Andrew Gibson, online physics tutor. Don't thank me. Your show is just worth investment. Chonky Cat in Chicago loves their Aunt Aoife. Cindy Lynch, yes, that's Cindy Lynch, Left Hand Voodoo, Fred Arguthius, Matthew Cutler, autistic Twitch streamer, which is twitch.tv MTC_streams, Gina Maloney, Angie Matke, Billionaire Oligarchs, Stargazer 97, Darlene, Laura Williams, no, not that one, the other one, Ram Tim Tickler, and Morgan Gordon. They all subscribe to patreon.com/NoRogan. You can do that as well. All patrons get early access to episodes and a special patron-only bonus segment every week, except for this week, because we're not doing a patron bonus segment. We don't do that for the season wrap-up, but every other week, you'll get a patron-only bonus segment, and it's ad-free. So you can check that out, patreon.com/NoRogan. And there is no main event, so we're just going to get started. We're going to jump right into this. We're going to start with corrections.
Yeah, we thought this would be a really good way to handle our season wrap-ups, because from time to time throughout the show, we try to be as fact-checked as possible. We try to be as diligent in our fact-checking as we can be. We try to only put forward things that are as accurate as possible. But we miss. We're going to miss from time to time. So what we're going to do is we're going to do what Joe Rogan doesn't do, which is when we get stuff wrong and people tell us we've got stuff wrong, we're going to talk about it on our season wrap-up. So this is kind of some of the comments that people have made and kind of what we think about them. Here's a first one. During an early one in the seasons, this is the Brett Weinstein episode, Joe brought up, as he is so wont to do so often, the time that CNN turned his face green to make it seem like he was killing himself on horse paste. And Cecil, you had thoughts about how the changing of his coloration on his video could have happened from a technical standpoint, and you talked about those on the show. We got a message from Aram who wrote in about that, and he said, as a software engineer who deals with video compression a lot, I felt the need to correct the explanation that you proposed of why the footage of Joe Rogan on CNN had a green tint. He said it's extremely unlikely to have anything to do with browsers using the GPU to decode the video. The likely explanation is that Joe filmed the video on his iPhone, which used a proprietary HDR dynamic range, fairly new at the time, along with its display P3 color space. Meanwhile, CNN broadcast video uses SDR and a different color space. Something went wrong in the process of conversion from one to the other, especially considering CNN didn't have privileged Instagram API access to pull the original MP4 file. He goes on, there's multiple threads from around that time on Apple and Adobe forums, other relevant subreddits, with people complaining about similar issues that they had with their own footage. He says, I don't think anyone's done a deep forensic dive on the exact thing that went wrong, but my own expert opinion is that there's so many things I can see that could have been the case. None of them require malice of any kind. It's simply not worth the effort and time to identify the specific one. And then he actually did send us a link to Joe's his Instagram reel with the video in question, and a link to the CNN video as host on the CNN website, and screenshots from, first of all, Linux and Firefox, where you can see the images look similar, and then the comparison between MacBook Air and Chrome, where there is a real difference in the color. And he points out that these things are being handled differently by Apple HDR. And he said, and somehow throughout all of this, it's resulted in the radicalization of one Joe Rogan, contributing to the fall of a country to fascism. As another podcast I listen to likes to say, the real bastard was capitalism all along.
It really
Okay, so
was.
that's Aram's take. What do you think, Cecil?
I think it's a good +1. I don't think that what I said was extremely unlikely because I'm going to demonstrate it right now in the video. It's not unlikely because it literally happened. I can show you right now a video I recorded very specifically that was from I got it from Spotify, but it can happen from anyone. In fact, I've had it happen in YouTube videos. I've had it happen with Instagram videos. It happens when you switch browsers. So I'm going to show you that video now.
They did release more Martin Luther King documents,
Yeah.
which is really crazy. Like, why are you holding secrets about the murder of one of the most beloved historical figures of all time?
So it's like a +1. Like, I think that, obviously the thing that you say is possible. I think the thing that I say is possible. It gives it an opportunity. Multiple things could have happened, but not like you suggest. None of them really show nefariousness.
Yeah, exactly. What it tells us quite clearly is that there are at least 2, if not more, ways that this could have happened that don't include a deep state media conspiracy to make the guy from the podcast look silly.
Yeah.
So Joe Rogan taking it quite sort of hard and assuming malice. It says a lot about Joe Rogan, really, and how he kind of interprets evidence in that kind of way. Sticking with the Bret Weinstein episode, I pointed out where Bret was using the term central dogma of biology. And I said that he was using that phrase to make it sound like evolution is dogmatic and kind of unwilling to change, that it refuses to consider other ideas, like, for example, his idea that fixes all of evolution, that this one crazy trick that evolution is still want you to know about, essentially. And therefore, he's trying to allude to the idea that evolution isn't scientific by calling it a dogma. Quite a few listeners got in touch to point out that central dogma as a phrase is actually a real term in biology and molecular biology. It's about the flow of genetic information through a system and how it kind of flows from one stage to another. That's kind of the central dogma of it. So they're pointing out that Bret wasn't inventing a term to use pejoratively. And I think that's a good catch. I'm not sure at the time whether I knew central dogma was a biological term. I probably didn't. But one thing I do know is that, like, at the time he was using it, he wasn't using it to refer to that. He wasn't using it to, when biologists use the shorthand central dogma, they're talking about one thing. He was using it completely out of context to describe something quite different. So I think the general point that I was making about Bret trying to paint evolution as dogmatic and evolution as dogmatic and unscientific, I think that still holds, but I didn't know about the fact that central dogma was accepted in other kind of areas. So happy to have that pointed out. That's cool. Okay, Cecil. People took issue with our pronunciation of a Texas state representative. And as our resident American and the man who said his name first on this particular show,
Okay.
I'm going to leave this one to you.
Yeah. By the way, I cut the part out where I said, how do you say his name? And you and I went back and forth to decide how we said his name, Michael Marshall. But
he is not a figure in my politics.
We didn't.
I'll tell you how to pronounce Keir Starmer correctly.
We didn't go to the internet, which was what we should have done to find out how he pronounces his name. And it was a bonus episode, but it's James Tallarico. I think we said Tallarico, but it's Tallarico. So we apologize to James, and we hope he wins his Senate seat.
Yeah, that's fair. While we're on that, actually, we also kept saying Andy No, and it's actually Andy No for pronunciation of his name as well. Yeah, and I think I knew that, and then just blanked on it when it came to it.
I mean, I would think it would be pronounced how I would have thought it would be pronounced how we suggested it was pronounced. That's interesting.
No, I know that a listener picked us up on it, and also I'd seen this somewhere else, and I should have known this because I've seen other people with names from the area of the world, like Nguyen, Nguyen is pronounced Nguyen, so I should have known that, and I made a mistake on that. I'm not going to apologize to Andy No, but to anyone else who's got the surname No, I apologize for pronouncing your surname wrong. That guy could still get fucked.
I will apologize for pronouncing people's name wrong when someone in England calls me Cecil. That's all I'll say. Well, I'll apologize then. Okay. So, by the way, there was another piece here. The Veteran Voice segment last week, Marsh, you wound up pronouncing something. This is Maori language from New Zealand. You pronounced it incorrectly. Do you want to try it again?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the Maori name for New Zealand, is what it is. This is actually one that we did look up before I said it. You put it in the notes and I was like, oh, best. You said to me, you best look that up first. I was like, good point. I looked up the pronunciation. I practiced it a couple of times and then I still fumbled it in the actual show. So here it is. Again, this morning I was practicing this. I went to the official pronunciation guide from New Zealand government several times. I believe it's Aotearoa. So I believe it's Aotearoa. Okay, that's what I think it is. So yeah, I was going to say Matako hei, which is Maori for I apologize. So I did look that up as well. Hopefully next week someone's going to get in touch and say, yeah, you pronounced the apology wrong as well, actually. And we're just going to be, we're going to graduate into being a Maori language education podcast instead. Just Duolingo for the Maori language. There was a one with in the Aaron Rodgers show. I claimed that when Aaron Rodgers, we talked about how he claimed to have an allergy to the vaccine, so some of the content in the vaccine. And I talked about what the allergy would look like if it was true that he had an allergy. And I talked about some of the symptoms of the type of allergy he was talking about. Logan got in touch to say the symptoms that Marsh lists off are symptoms of anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis is defined as an IgE, think allergy reaction proteins response affecting at least two body systems. So throat tightening and a rash together as a common example. Anaphylactic shock specifically is anaphylaxis, where one of the symptoms is low blood pressure. That said, there are still plenty of reason to be skeptical of his claims of an allergy. Logan says, while possible, PEG allergies are exceedingly rare. As a pediatrician, I prescribe PEG literally daily or more. It's used for constipation and have not only never encountered an allergic reaction to it, I don't know any doctor who has. That's what Logan said. Yep, totally fair. I was speaking beyond my knowledge. I'd looked some stuff up. Clearly hadn't got as much information on that as possible. So I really appreciate a medical expert getting in touch to add the context that I'd missed there.
Also in the Aaron Rodgers episode, we mentioned that nobody was saying that the vaccine could stop you from getting the virus and stop you from getting sick. Michael wrote in to say, appreciate the work you guys do, and it doesn't affect the thrust of the argument. But early in the pandemic, there was a period when the American public health authorities were unrealistically overplaying the effectiveness of the COVID vaccine in a way that Joe and Aaron discussed. And he says, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, as the CDC director, by any measure, a position of authority that could reasonably look for public health advice, did claim in TV interviews that vaccinated people didn't carry the virus nor get sick, and later told the Senate that vaccinated people couldn't spread COVID. This was totally irresponsible, empowering anti-vax cranks and damaging the trust in public health, but it did happen. Joe Biden made similar claims as the president. And we will include links to that in the show notes today for the links that were sent to us. Totally fair point. I think what happened during that time is we got an opportunity to see science happen in real time. And science changes its mind sometimes. Sometimes new facts come up, new data comes up, and scientists look at that data and say, oh, we're changing our mind now, because that's how science should work. And people don't like that. And Joe didn't like that very specifically because it changed expectations about what we should expect with the COVID vaccine. And people weren't fond of that. A lot of people weren't fond of that. And that made people suspect that science didn't know what it was doing. It was fumbling the ball.
Yeah, and that's really tricky because I'm often critical of the way, from a science messaging point of view, that scientists have to kind of end up couching things of like, we know this much with this amount of confidence intervals, and we have this much amount of evidence, but still more studies need to be done. And it's all tentative because that's the language of science, is we know this for now until we find something else. And that obviously isn't always good for communicating with the public, because the cranks down the road are saying ivermectin will cure your COVID, and there's no confidence bars on that. So like normally I'm pretty critical of the idea that you couch everything in science. But this is the backfire of what happens when you don't necessarily couch things, when you are trying to talk with maybe an undue level of confidence that when the science actually updates itself based on the further information, you'll change your point of view. But like, people who are on the right side of things aren't allowed to be wrong in public because it only becomes evidence to Joe Rogan. Well, they don't know what they're doing. They keep changing their mind because of evidence. So yeah, it is a really, really tricky line to walk.
In the Andrew Wilson episode, there was some criticism that we didn't go into enough detail about who he is and his backstory, which at least one listener felt would have been necessary to really understand who Andrew is and what he's about.
Yeah, and it's absolutely true that we didn't give you an extensive backstory on who he was. I think with our show, this isn't a biography. Is kind of one of the things I would say to that. We do the thing at the start of like, who is this person and what should we know about them? But what we don't want is that to be a half-hour segment of the show. So we're just telling you all sorts of things about this person before you hear a single word of what they've got to say to Joe. Like the way that we do our show is like an analytical, close reading of the text of Joe Rogan's show. And we're highlighting specific themes. We're illustrating that if you pay close attention, even in the conversations that are had here, that alone can reveal a lot about what the people are about and who they are without needing to go like really deep dive into their history. I think the comments suggest that listeners might think Andrew Wilson is stupid and not nefarious from the way that we presented it. And I think I disagree with that, because at no point did we suggest he was stupid or even think that he was stupid. I think what we highlighted were the places where he was misogynistic, where he emphasized white Christian identity politics, and where he worked as hard as he could to exonerate ICE from the murders that they had committed. And I don't think that's from stupidity to do those various things. I'm sure there are other shows that will go in a different direction on him. They'll show who he is by giving you an extensive origin story. I think the commenter mentioned like the bread tube shows, and that's great. That's what they do. They can do that. You can get a really good idea of who he is as a person and his background from that. But what you wouldn't do if you listened to that is get a better idea of how he and Joe would work to excuse ICE killing US citizens, which is what we chose to focus on kind of for a reason. And I'm really happy with the show that we put out. I think we did a really good job of illustrating that. The other thing to bear in mind is that Joe puts out 4 shows a week, more than 10 hours of content. We put out a show once a week with 2 hours of content at most. Joe's got 4,000 shows for us to go back and look at. So there is value to a show that highlights what's being said and where it's coming from and where it's wrong and what picture of the world it's trying to make you believe in. And I think that can come from this analytical close reading of a single text without having to go into necessarily an encyclopedic biographical essay on someone's history.
Are we going to get a correction on 4,000 shows? I think it's 4,000 plus hours. It's not 4,000 shows because there's only a 25.
It's not 4,000 shows. It is 4,000 hours. It's 4,000 plus hours. Yeah. I mean,
I just corrected Marsh during our correction
in real time. What I'd done there is I'd assumed like 2 hours. Yeah. You're absolutely right.
It's 4,000 hours of shows, but it's 2,000 plus shows. It's 2,500 or something like that. We're at 2,500. So it's a lot of shows. Yeah. It's a lot of shows.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah. Okay, so that's true. Next up, we covered Joe's reaction to the Epstein files. We did 2 episodes on the Epstein files. Nick wrote in to say, I love you, Cecil, but you erroneously said in the episode this week, part 1 of the Epstein files, that nobody pleads guilty to something they didn't do. It sounded like you actually hesitated because you caught yourself. I wanted to remind you that people plead guilty to lesser charges all the time to avoid the risk of a worse charge and a penalty because they can't afford to fight it. And Jonas wrote in to make the same point.
I like how you couched that at the end, and you are right. I should have said... it was a mistake, 100%. I own that. But what I should have said was a billionaire doesn't plead guilty to something they didn't do. Because what we saw was Epstein got a ridiculous sweetheart deal. When he finally pled guilty to a much lesser charge, and he had a ton of influence in that area to get him that really sweetheart deal. So we know that he had a ton of influence to keep him probably underneath the radar for a long time too. So I will take the correction and I will say instead, a billionaire does not do that. A regular person probably does it 9 times out of 10 because they don't want to fight the charges and possibly lose and go to jail. But a billionaire, they have plenty of money, plenty of high-paid lawyers, and plenty of influence to get out of things that Jeffrey Epstein eventually couldn't even get out of.
Yeah, and I think I heard it at the time, but didn't want to jump in because I thought it would like derail where we carried on going with the conversation. But
it was a mistake.
It's a great
my
point.
mistake. I'll own it. Marsh, you made a comment during the Andrew Doyle episode. This is from O'Sheen. Andrew Doyle's uncle was a Republican activist in Derry, a city under occupation. He grew up a second-class citizen and cut his teeth campaigning for equal access to housing for his community. While Andrew Doyle is a disgrace to his lineage and his background generally, saying growing up in a council estate in England is more disadvantaged to growing up as a working class Catholic in a working class Catholic ghetto in occupied Ireland is really wrong and should be obvious. Otherwise, I enjoy the podcast, but come on.
Yeah, okay. I take the point here. This is fair. I absolutely didn't mean to imply that growing up in a council estate in northeast England is more disadvantaged to growing up in a working class Catholic ghetto in occupied Ireland. That's not remotely what I was thinking. I was saying there, and I definitely didn't mean to give the impression that Andrew Doyle's uncle Eamon Millar was some sort of silver-platered political operator. Like, he absolutely worked hard to get where he was against an oppressive system. I do think there is a generational aspect to take into account, though, because Andrew Doyle's uncle was 92 when he died last year. So he was very much of my grandparents' generation, not my parents' generation, even though Doyle is roughly my age. And Derry in 1960 was a completely different place to Derry in 1978 when Doyle was born, and 1983 when I was born, and it would continue to change over the years. But actually, what Derry was like in any of those times doesn't matter, because Andrew Doyle didn't grow up in a working class ghetto in occupied Ireland. He grew up in the Midlands in England. It's not even clear that whether he was born in Ireland. Like, Wikipedia lists Derry as the city of his birth, but its only citation to that is a newspaper article calling for young actors to appear in a new play. It's an article in the Irish Times or the Irish News or something like that. And it's a play by what they offhandedly call a Derry-born stand-up, Andrew Doyle. But then elsewhere, his listing from his own theatre agent lists him as being born in the Midlands. And he told Irish News that he grew up in the Midlands, quote, although my mother is from Derry. And that feels like an odd wording to use if he was born in Derry. I think he'd say, I grew up in the Midlands, but I was born in Derry. So I'm not even sure if he was ever born in Derry. So yeah, I totally appreciate the clarification on Andrew Doyle's uncle. And I at no point intended to make it seem like I was saying the Northeast was a more disadvantaged place than occupied Ireland, because I do not believe that for a moment. The point that I was trying to make was about how people with similar on-paper identities, white Catholic male, can have different access to opportunities due to the chance consequences of where they grow up and to whom. And there were better ways to do that than I did. But that's the point I was trying to make, and clearly I didn't make it quite well enough. So yeah, I appreciate the correction there. And then finally, I saw a few listeners pointing out that during Mark Andreassen's main feed episode, we didn't reference the fact that Mark was talking very fast in an overconfident way while sniffing very, very regularly. And a few people highlighted that maybe we should have said that these were signs that he might be doing cocaine. And honestly, I don't know how you feel about this, Cecil. I think this is a tricky one.
Yeah.
Because we joked about it in the Off the Record episode. We made a few jokes about it, but we kept it away from the main feed. And part of the reason I kept it from the main feed is because we've got no evidence that he was doing cocaine. We've got our own kind of speculative inferences, and we try not to be speculative on the main show. We try to be pretty well researched. We try to be accurate. We try to be pretty thorough. Off the record, we'll kind of relax a little bit and maybe make a few more jokes. But we want to try and avoid what might be perceived as unfair bias. And accusing someone of being on drugs when we have at best circumstantial evidence, that would slip into bias, I think. I think I'd slip into speculation there. That said, some listeners did make the very fair point that someone talking about their role in law enforcement while potentially being on illegal substances is an important hypocrisy that could have been worth pointing out. And I understand that. If I'd have been able to point to the white powder coming out of his nose, then maybe it would have been different. But yeah, I don't think we could have really done that on the main feed. But I understand why people would talk about that.
Every time I've heard him speak, he does that sniffing at the end of a sentence. And me personally, I'm not sure that it's drugs so much as I think it's his tick nervous laugh of what you would do if you were sort of like, I think it's his anticipation of the person accepting the things he's said as sort of revelatory. And he's sort of overwhelmed with his own genius most of the time by sniffing loudly at the end of these sentences, at least in the places that I've heard him speak. It's not just individually, it's not just on Joe's show. Anytime I've heard him speak, that's how he speaks. So either he is railed on coke all the time, or this is a tick of his speech. It's one or the other. I'm not sure. I didn't blood test him, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, if he was overwhelmed by his own genius, that doesn't sound like cocaine to me. It can't be at all.
All right. So we spend some time every season trying to figure out what we've learned about Joe Rogan this last season. And we covered a lot of different things this season. We started out the season covering J.D. Vance. several episodes about medicine. There was Aaron Rodgers that talked about COVID. There was Gavin DeBecker who did AIDS denial.
Yeah.
There was some references to some things that happened in the news more recently, like the Alex Preddy and ICE, which happened with Andrew Wilson. And then also Rand Paul talked about ICE in Minnesota. Then there was, when the Epstein files came out, we dedicated 2 full shows to that, covering the things that Joe talked about in the Epstein files. There was a moment where RFK came on his show to clean up in aisle 3 to talk about all the Trump policies that were happening. The war in Iran came up. This was with Dave Smith. And then we also dug into the back catalog. We covered Russell Brand and Tulsi Gabbard, Andy Ngo. And so we worked our way around in different places. And we also went away from Joe's shows. We leaned away from Joe's shows for a couple of episodes. We did a Candace Owens and we did a Tucker Carlson. So we sort of worked our way around a little bit and found out some interesting things. And I think the one thing that was an interesting through line throughout Joe's shows was his reliance on the Great Replacement Theory and the Great Replacement Theory in other places. Now, I did not include in this montage a clip from Tucker Carlson, which literally could have been the entire show. So I could have just played the entire show for you because that was all the Great Replacement Theory. But I do want to play you a short montage. It's a little longer than a normal clip would be of several clips put together of the Great Replacement Theory as we work our way through. There will be clips in here from J.D. Vance, from Rand Paul, from Andrew Wilson, RFK, and Dave Smith.
I think Kamala Harris and the Democrats, they want to give these millions upon millions of illegal aliens the right to vote. They want to legalize them. They want to make it easier for them to participate in our elections. And that means fundamentally the end of American democracy with these newcomers. But again, it will have degraded the voting power of the people who have the legal right to be here. And so, for example, the state of Ohio lost a congressional seat in the last census. And states that have high illegal immigrant populations picked up congressional seats. So you're actually taking away congressional representation from American citizens and giving it to illegal aliens. Even if you don't give them the right to vote, you're still destroying the voting power of American citizens.
Because it's based on population.
Because it's based on population, including illegal immigrants.
What was your take on the border being wide open for the last 4 years? And not just wide open, but they were encouraging people to come to America, telling them how to do it, and even helping them get across, giving them EBT cards, giving them cell phones. What was your take on all that?
I do believe that they understand that most of the people coming across will ultimately be voters and that 2 out of 3 will vote Democrat. So it's all power politics. They say it's about, humanity and being humane and all that. It isn't that. It's all about voting demographics.
But people are saying very few of them have been violent criminals. But we found out there was like 8%. This is just 8% of what we know has been caught. That is a lot of violent criminals. If you got 500,000 people and 8% of them are murderers and rapists, and they snuck in, not even snuck in, because they were allowed access to the United States over the last 4 years, somewhere to the tune of, let's be like super charitable. Let's say it's only 10 million, because I think it's a lot more. And they don't. A lot more. Yeah, they don't really know the number because it's really the numbers that they're giving are based on interactions, right? But how many people snuck through and they didn't have an interaction with them? It's a lot, man. It's a lot of people. And they did this shit on purpose. And they did this shit because they want more congressional seats, because the census doesn't count citizens. It doesn't count legal citizens. It just counts human beings. And then there's also the issue that this is the first time in history that the border has been wide open for 4 years. That's a different thing. It's a different thing when you have at least 10 million people.
You drastically change the country in a way that is not really, it's not easy to just undo. I mean, as we've seen, right?
and a lot of like the most capable women in our society have advanced educations and careers. And by the time they kind of realize that they'd actually like 4 or 5, 6, 8 kids, it's too late.
Right.
Okay. So, and this is a big reason why the rate of reproduction of the population is falling so much.
Right.
And so what if all of a sudden the best people in the society all of a sudden could start having like a significantly large number of kids at a point in their life when they're completely capable? One wonders if there's a political motivation, right? Which is basically to get the responsible people out of the city to be able to change the voting patterns, right? And so, if
God, that's so insidious.
Yeah, and so you wonder, you look at these programs over time, and kind of as the the populations of the major cities have shifted like radically over the last 50 years. Like they have very little in common with the population distributions they had 50 years ago, and so you wonder how much of it is massaging the voter base.
Well, that's interesting.
Jesus.
I forgot to
It's
mention
so
Mark
bad.
Andreessen coming at the end there. Yeah, so.
Yeah, it's wild how much there is. And obviously, this is just this season. We've seen it in other seasons too. And it is just this constant drumbeat. And this is kind of one of the reasons that I think Rogan can be particularly harmful, because not really many of these conversations were about immigration and were about the Great Replacement theory, but it was a topic he continues to bring up. And he'll bring up, these weren't the only times he brought it up in the last 6 months worth of his shows. They're just the ones that we happen to feature. And I think that's the harm, because if you're a regular listener to Rogan, you might be listening to him talking to a UFC fighter about something. He's going to bring it back to the Great Replacement, and it's going to normalize that as a talking point and normalize it as just something that's true. And that's how radicalization happens. And it's just the insidiousness of it. Like, even in that Mark Andreessen clip, when he's talking about, what if the best people could reproduce more, and if they're trying to drive the responsible people out. And he might not mean white by that. He might be talking about intelligence. He might be talking about class. But he is talking about the promotion above all else of a certain type of people genetically over another type of people. Like, these people are the ones whose genes should prosper. So this is eugenics tied to the Great Replacement. It's insidious that it is so clearly there, and Joe just keeps buying every bit of it.
I think this is a product of this zero-sum ideal, right? So zero-sum ethics often results in these types of things. And this is something I sent you maybe a week ago when you and I were talking offline. Even the trans bathroom argument could be framed as the Great Replacement theory. If you think about it in the same terms, their argument is that there's a group of people who belong, and those people are being forced out by invaders. I'm using air quotes here, so but they are being forced out by these invaders. And what we need to do is we need to run into the arms of the authoritarians to protect us from these invaders. And what does that do? That takes away your rights, because now people are transvestigating anybody who comes into the bathroom. So they, if you happen to not be someone who traditionally has, traditional feminine characteristics, you may be someone who is immediately stopped outside of a bathroom. We've seen people get arrested or at least stopped by police when they're just literally trying to use the bathroom. And it's the bathroom that even the people who are fighting against this would let them use, but it's this authoritarian pressure. And so this zero-sum ideal leaks its way into all different aspects of our society. And Joe has capitalized on it very specifically when it comes to the Great Replacement theory and immigration. But he also talks about it all the time when it comes to trans people and other things too. We also wound up covering the Epstein files. And actually, I was really happy with the show we put out, the 2 shows we put out about the Epstein files. We spent a lot of time on those 2 shows. We worked our way through many different Joe Rogan shows. We listened to hours of tape in order to find all those pieces and decide which ones stayed, which ones went. There was, I believe, 6 shows plus 4 back catalog shows that we wound up sort of cannibalizing clips from and putting into one big 2-part mega show. But what I think is interesting, Marsh, is the difference between the first clip when Joe is talking to the person that he's having a conversation with when the Epstein files are immediately released, and then his conversation, what happens literally just in like 9 days later or 11 days later, his his thoughts on the Epstein files after talking to multiple people and specifically talking to a person who really brought up a lot of demonic stuff. So I'm going to play these two clips are smashed together in one clip, the first clip in this segment, and then one from Evan Hafer later on.
Epstein clearly was some sort of a blackmailer. And this is an email that Epstein wrote. So it could be complete fiction. Epstein could have wrote that just to put pressure on Bill Gates for some fucking business deal. Like, who fucking knows? He could have spread rumors and then said that he'll squash those rumors. But these guys are dealing in deception and blackmail. And so you can't, like, assume that it's true. The fear of these, like, literally demonic human beings that are running the world and don't give a fuck about human lives and enjoy watching people being tortured, enjoy watching people killed, participating in ritual sacrifice of people, and they do it in order to show that you're a part of a team. And we know that has always historically been a real thing. The day he was indicted in 2018, the very next day he ordered 330 gallons of sulfuric acid.
What?
Yes. He ordered 6 55-gallon drums of sulfuric acid to be delivered to the island. And so there's a lot of people online saying, oh, that was probably for his desalination plant. It's probably like a regular thing they need to order. So then someone else did a deep dive and said, no, this is the first time this was ever ordered.
I checked that again. I saw there was 2 other ones.
Oh, there was 2 other orders?
2017 and 2015.
Oh, so that guy was wrong.
The first one from that company, potentially.
Ah, that makes sense. So maybe it was for this desalination equipment, but also that's a lot of sulfuric acid. You know, if I needed 5 gallons for my desalination equipment, but
right,
239 gallons or whatever it is to burn kids, to fucking get rid of bodies.
Oh, God, just Joe Rogan, like, pontificating on how much sulfuric acid a water desalination plant for an entire island takes is ludicrous. Maybe Epstein switched supplier because the first supplier would only sell him stuff for the desalination of water. So he needs to find another acid supplier for the disposal of baby bodies. It's like, this guy, he won't do both. It's like a one-use kind of chemical.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah. The distance Joe made there from, like, where it started, which even when he started, he wasn't really engaging with the real crimes that were in there. At the start,
yes,
he's like, the crime here is blackmail, which there isn't evidence of the crime of blackmail. And he's overlooking the fact that the crime is the sexual abuse of women and young girls. That is the crime. He overlooks that into blackmail. That's at the start. By the end, all of that is in the wind, and he's focusing on the satanic element of what Epstein was about. And it's interesting to me because there was an article in the New York Times that I know I sent to you, Cecil, talking about how the Trump administration responded to the release of the Epstein files. And at one point, they floated the idea of Todd Blanche going on Rogan to explain how transparent they've all been. And there's a bit in the New York Times article where J.D. Vance phones in. He's in my country at the time, and he pushes, to release the Epstein files. And he says about how he should be the one to go on Rogan to talk about how transparent they've been. And he said he'd just gotten off the phone with Rogan, and Rogan had said he wouldn't have Todd Blanche on, but he would have Vance on. And it's interesting to me that the administration is in open conversation with Joe Rogan about how to do their cover-up, how to do their PR and their administration of this, how to manage their public perception of it. And Rogan is very happy to be involved in that. And I'm not saying that his transition from the evidence here is all about blackmail of powerful people to Epstein was satanic and there's a small number of satanic people. I'm not saying that was influenced by him being in conversation with some of the people closely tied to some of the people in the Epstein files, but it does seem an interesting move that he's really shifted his focus, and he was doing that whilst talking to people who were trying to get him to do their PR for him.
Yeah. And that article is really well sourced by the New York Times. So this is not like just somebody's speculation. They did their due diligence to go search for that stuff. And it's a really really interesting deep dive article. We'll put it in the show notes for people to take a look at. But what a shift between the two things, Marsh. What a shift between his because he gets introduced to the demonic stuff and essentially a rehash of Pizzagate from Roger Avery. So that person comes on the show and then tells him all about Pizzagate and grape soda and et cetera, and all these code words and how there's actual demonic people and there's a certain number of those demonic people in the world, et cetera, et cetera. So he got introduced to it by him, and then it made its way into the demonic stuff, made its way into multiple conversations afterwards because Joe felt a little incredulous during that conversation and then later on just adopted it. So it was a really interesting shift to see him sort of come around to the aspect of Jeffrey Epstein, Pizzagate, and sort of the demonic push that people try to put on Jeffrey Epstein as being like a very sadistic and, in fact, someone who literally tortured people to, I guess, get adrenochrome or whatever other Pizzagate thing you think.
Yeah, it's really interesting watching misinformation get injected into Joe's bloodstream and then watching which misinformation passes the blood-brain barrier and makes it into his brain. And once it's there, it's forever lodged in his grey matter. Sure. And I think this is one of those things that is now fully lodged.
For sure. We also heard a lot about the Book of Enoch this episode.
Oh, God, we did.
We did. So multiple people in Joe's life were either they talked about the Book of Enoch to him or he talked about it to them. So I'm going to play some clips from Anna Paulina Luna. I'm going to play a clip from our bonus episode from Matthew McConaughey. Then Dan Farah also had a clip, as well as Michael P. Masters. So this is a little montage of his discussion of the Book of Enoch.
And all I'm going to say is, look, and we can go into some of the books that were removed from what we know as the modern day Bible, but I read through the Book of Enoch multiple times. And I'm not saying that these things are angels. Okay, that's not at all what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that depending on where you are in regards to your whole perspective on whether or not God exists, like I believe in God, I'm a Christian. There has to have been, and there's admissions that there was other creations that God made, but that we were the most prized creation. The story goes that Revelations actually had replaced Enoch. And so it's interesting because when you're looking kind of full circle on, you hear the stuff that some of these people are talking about, and then you see and you read the Book of Enoch, which is a wild read, okay? And then you look at kind of what our modern day description is of what angels and entities are versus what Enoch was seeing and reporting in his language and ability at that time. I think that there's a lot that brings you to then ask the question, well, why would they remove this information? If it's truly, written in part of the oldest Bible in the world, why would they then take it out? Well, it does say in Enoch, and then also too, I think in Genesis, that the stars cried out. And so if you're looking, well, a star, if it's not, what do they mean by stars crying out? And then Enoch actually alludes to stars in certain capacities being potentially angels. Now, I'm not saying and this is kind of interesting because, I've had this aspect of my task force, what we've been investigating, but then I have, my personal beliefs and, my religious beliefs. And what I'm telling you is that in my position officially, I've seen men pervert information to get what they want. So it's not unlikely that an entire, very secret, very truthful text was omitted in an effort to control population and to insert yourself between an individual's relationship between them directly and God.
Look, it just starts spitting it out to you and tells you the Watchers and the Nephilim. The Watchers descended to earth on Mount Hermon. They take human wives, teaching humanity forbidden knowledge, sorcery, astrology, metalworking, weapons, cosmetics, and enchantments. Enchantments. This is older than the New Testament, older than the Old Testament. And, and I'm learning about it through ChatGPT. So I'm asking it, tell me more. And I was doing that for 2 hours last night. I was like, okay, well, this is I'm having a conversation with a very knowledgeable professor. To me, it felt almost like doing a podcast. Well, that's also the weirdness of the Book of Enoch.
Yeah.
The Book of Enoch is essentially describing watchers who come down from the sky and mate with women.
Yeah.
Well, if you told that story for 1,000 years, and the real story was they came down, they got a hold of human babies and human mothers and introduced genetics that were alien into these children, that would be like they mated with women.
Yeah.
It would be kind of the same thing. Well, then there's the weird stories from ancient scripts, ancient texts like the Book of Enoch. Like, what is that all about? Like, that's some weird stuff where it talks about the Watchers coming down from the sky and mating with humans and creating the Nephilim who destroy everything.
Yeah, I might get some shit for this, but I would be willing to bet that all major religions and the little ones have some sort of UFO alien component to the myth and legend that gave rise to them over time.
It makes sense.
It does.
It doesn't. I love the way he adds the little ones. All
The
major
little-
religions.
the little
and
tiny
the little ones.
baby
Don't leave the
ones,
little ones out there. The minor
The
religions.
adorable little
Yeah.
ones. Yeah.
It's like I don't know whether Rogan was interested in the Book of Enoch before he got like very invested in AI as this constant companion to have intellectual conversations with, or whether AI has sent him down that road. But the fact that he believes he's learning a lot about the Book of Enoch and therefore about the history of humanity by having conversations with AI that's just affirming what he wants to be true about the Book of Enoch kind of says a lot about Joe Rogan's ability to discern fact from fiction, you know, truth from what he wants to be true. And I'm hoping this is a passing fad and we don't have to spend a lot of time next season with that. And he's talking about the Book of Enoch.
Another Book of
again. They're coming down, they're teaching metalworking.
Metalworking.
They're teaching
That's my
cosmetics
favorite
as well. We can't sleep on the angels teaching cosmetics. Like they came down, they showed us how to do magic and alchemy, and also how to put your blusher on just right and to do that like smoky eye.
Metalworky is my favorite thing I've ever heard. It's so funny. But yeah, Joe, my favorite part of that is the Matthew McConaughey part when he's like saying that he learned about the Book of Enoch from ChatGPT and it was as good as sitting down with an expert, which I thought was amazing. So really good stuff that we learned this season. Hopefully we'll learn some other interesting things next season. Okay, so best and worst this season. Marsh, what is your least harmful episode? So we can't just say the best episode because that's not a thing. What was the least harmful one?
And I'm not allowed to use the bonus ones, I assume, because we pick those because they might seem less than harmful. I think the least harmful is probably Michael P. Masters. So that's the aliens are humans from the future coming back to steal our sperm guy. That's what he was all about. And honestly, I think the only real harm being done in that episode was endorsing this particular guy's fantasies, which for Rogan, that's about as good as it gets.
Yeah.
Like no one else is being harmed by this guy believing that he had an encounter with aliens who tried to rob us of our precious bodily fluids.
The one reason why I didn't pick him, I was going to pick Rogan versus Plate, but that doesn't work because that's not really it's kind of a cop out too. But I was going to pick Michael P. Masters, but the reason why I didn't is because Michael P. Masters is actually a university professor. He's an honest to goodness university professor. And I think that sort of lends credence to some of the things he says, even if it shouldn't, right? Like I think some people might hear it and think, okay, this guy's an expert.
Yeah.
One that wasn't was Dan Farah. That guy wasn't an expert. He was just a guy and he made a movie. And so I think one thing that we could argue, we could quibble about is, does the movie do more harm by introducing more people, or does the expertise on the end of this guy's? So I don't know. It's plus one. I don't know. It's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I think they're both they're
in that area.
They're both relatively harmless. I think most of the time we're going to pick a Bigfoot or an alien episode for something like that, and that's what we did this time.
Okay, well, that was the least harmful. What do you think about the most harmful? And obviously, can't have just one.
Yeah.
Let's go for a top 5.
Top 5. All right, so I'm going to go number 5, Rachel Wilson. I think somebody who's a woman who's espousing those types of views gets a bunch of guys. I think that's very dangerous to tell a bunch of guys that are listening because it helps validate their sort of mindset about that. And it was full of misinformation and bad information. And Joe just wholeheartedly swallowed it. I'd say number 4 is Rand Paul because I think many people got the wrong idea for that specific episode. There was a Gestapo line and a comment, but most of the time he was he was really sort of apologizing for the current administration. And I think people got the wrong idea for that one. I think number 3 would be RFK, because RFK just essentially came in and just read off state-sponsored propaganda. And Joe doesn't have any kind of qualification to push back on any kind of those interviews. Gavin DeBecker is number 2. And Gavin DeBecker is an AIDS denier, and so is Joe. And that was really eye-opening. That is really something that I did not expect to hear from Joe Rogan, and it was really, really dangerous episode. And then I think finally my number 1 would be what we started the season out with, JD Vance. I think he is one of the reasons we are here today. They wound up, and it's also one of the reasons we started the show. I think JD Vance was introduced a lot of different tenets of the Great Replacement Theory to Joe, and came on. There was no pushback whatsoever to any of the things he said. It was essentially a 3-hour propaganda machine to try to get him and Trump elected. That's what happened with Trump. So I would say, in my opinion, living in today's America, JD Vance is the most dangerous.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable list. My list is not dissimilar in places, but I had Andy Ngo as the 5th, and mostly because of the age of it. So this was 2019. At the time, Ngo was just an open propagandist, and Joe embraced him and endorsed him. And this is before Joe became the Joe that he is today.
It's a great
this
point.
is like 7 years ago.
Great point.
And so it was Joe showing how susceptible he really is to all the kind of anti-woke messaging, and how he will follow anyone who just pushes those particular buttons, even as someone who is as obvious and exposed a liar as Andy Ngo. I had RFK Jr. in 4th. I'd have put him higher if it was the only time we'd covered him on the show. But previously, we got the RFK who was running for president. This was just the RFK who was like fully subservient to Trump Inc. And he was there to propagandize. But we kind of heard a lot of his worst stuff the previous time. So maybe I was kind of more accustomed to it. I had Rachel Wilson in 3rd, because I think the real harm is that like some of the men in Joe's audience who already lean like slightly anti-feminist will now be given carte blanche to reject the idea of women's equality because of this pick-me gal who was really just there to pump her business selling ahistorical lies. Like that's what she was there for. So I think that was quite dangerous. In number 2, I cheated slightly. I've got Rand Paul and Andrew Wilson combined. And I'm terming them together because they both covered Joe's reaction to Minnesota.
Good point.
And it was just those elements kind of were united for me. Those were the clearest sign that Joe is willing, or just how far Joe is willing to compromise his beliefs and his values if it means providing cover to Trump. Right down to excusing the murder of Americans in the street. And number 1, I had Gavin DeBecker. Like, he's a HIV denier who is saying things that are going to kill people. Joe completely agrees. But also it is an illustration of just how thoroughly COVID warped Joe, because we could show like that prior to COVID, Joe was interested in HIV denial, but had his fingers burned on it and stepped away. But COVID proved to Joe that actually he was right about HIV all along. And I think that's the kind of misinformation, not just that on HIV that's going to kill, but it's also going to be the reason he's so susceptible to so much of the health information too.
So we had some questions asked by our patrons. Remember that if you want to join in on this next season, you can become a patron at patreon.com/NoRogan. We're going to start with Scorpion the Bird. They ask, will you be expanding your reach into the right-wing media sphere further? I'm thinking about Alex Jones in particular, especially now that Knowledge Fight has ceased operations. Knowledge Fight did some great episodes featuring Rogan guesting on InfoWars, and I'd love to see your examination of the Rogan-Jones relationship from the Rogan side.
Yeah, I think this is something we're definitely keen to do. Not necessarily Alex Jones and InfoWars per se, because that's ground that's kind of already been well and truly covered by this point. And also because Alex's influence has really waned over the years. So I'm certainly open to looking at when Rogan has been around Jones, but I wouldn't necessarily go off and just watch an Alex Jones episode. But we have ventured off our beat to cover Candace Owens and Tucker this season. And I think there was some really useful stuff in there in us doing that. So I think we'll carry on doing that. Joe often acts as this entry point into that world for a lot of people. And we see that, like, just look at how many guests appear on Tucker, and then Joe says to them like, "Oh, I saw you on Tucker." When they're on Joe's show, well, I know you exist because I saw you on Tucker. So these guys are entry points to the Rogan world. So it's definitely valuable for us to keep dipping into the deeper waters now and then to essentially show where the undercurrents of Joe's show can drag you over time. So yeah, we're definitely going to carry on doing that.
And one of the things we are going to do this upcoming season is we are going to be visiting Joe's neighbors in the Rogan sphere for our bonus shows. So our bonus shows this upcoming season, we're planning on hitting a bunch of different shows that are in Joe's orbit for the bonus shows. We find that would be not only an entertaining bonus show, but something that would be something that we could facilitate for the bonus show portion. And then we'd, of course, release some of those when the next season ends. We'd release them to patrons.
Picking up that, Rain V. Gardner asked, which other right-wing podcastosphere figures do you think is most worth this show looking at?
Well, I think we already covered Candace, but Candace deserves another extra look, maybe a third, fourth, fifth look. We covered a very specific aspect of what she was talking about, but there's plenty of stuff to cover with Candace Owens. I think Steve Bannon's got a ton of tape out there, and he's a very dangerous individual. Katie Miller is married to Stephen Miller, who is the Department of Ghoulishness at the White House. So that would be an interesting thing. Matt Walsh, we haven't covered the Matt Walsh show on this particular podcast. I think we're going to do it in this upcoming season. But Matt Walsh is a right-wing podcaster, and he was a blogger for a long time. So another interesting thing. I'd like to do a Nick Fuentes episode. I think that might be really useful to do. And then Laura Loomer, who was part of in Trump's orbit quite a bit and has some very interesting opinions. So it might be fun to cover those people.
Yeah, I agree. I'd maybe also throw in like Tim Pool or Dave Rubin to that list to see what they've got to say, especially when we know how close they were to literal Russian propaganda and things. It might even be worth looking at. I know Don Jr.'s got a podcast, so maybe it's worth taking a look at that at some point. Also, we're open to other ideas. So if listeners, if you think there's someone that we've not heard of or someone we should be paying attention to, by all means, let us know, especially if it's someone up and coming that you think is going to have influence in the future, because it'd be worth us kind of getting on that when that happens.
Rizwan Chandri asks, you have wrapped up 2 seasons of the show and you're about to wrap up a third. Have you heard if Joe Rogan is aware of your podcast?
Yeah, not remotely. And I actually did think that maybe the article that we had in The Guardian might have caught his eye. But if it did, he's not let onto that at all. And I think part of the reason is, there's so many media stories about Joe and there's so many podcasts that exist just to like summarize and glaze and praise his show in order to get the reflected attention. I can believe he genuinely doesn't pay much attention to it. I actually set up a Google alert for mentions of Joe Rogan in the press, and the amount of stuff that picks up every single day. It's not a surprise to me if he hasn't found us. It also wouldn't be a surprise to me if he had found us but didn't want to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
So PIAT plus Cogdis plus DOD plus Open and Args is my favorite. Asked, I just want to know how many times you guys have said to yourself, oh my God, I can't take any more of Joe Rogan. Please, please, dear God, that doesn't exist. Make it all stop.
You know those things, those counters, those press counters that they have that they count cars with or people? I've broken like 4 of those already. So I don't know. I mean, at this point, I stopped counting.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I mean, the thing is, there's a reason that we take season breaks. There is a reason we take time off. I'm looking forward to like 5 or 6 or whatever it is weeks of not having to listen to Joe Rogan. That said, in our season breaks, what we do is we sample our way through other Rogan episodes to see if they're worth covering in the main show. So it's not even the only holiday is that we don't have to fact check it. But yeah, we're still going to be listening to more Rogan here and there, unfortunately.
Awkwardly Corporeal says, as you listen to more of this content, how have your opinions of Joe changed? Dan and Jordan from Knowledge Fight would talk about Alex Jones on the stupid versus evil continuum. And while I agree that it doesn't really matter since the outcome of their actions is more important than the intent, where do you think Joe falls on that scale?
Yeah, so this is tricky. So like on the first bit about how your opinions have changed, I don't think my opinion has changed so much as we listen more and more, but it changed once I started to actually listen at all. Because I was pretty open going into the idea that maybe Joe was a deliberate propagandist, that he's a savvy operator, or that he might be intentionally inflaming things in order to get clicks and money and influence. And I think I was disabused of that possibility pretty early on in season 1. And I still remain unconvinced by and large that that's the case now. I think Joe is pretty much what he appears to be, with the exception, like, he's just a guy who wants to have conversations and he's willing to take at face value what people say. And that's kind of one of the reasons he's so bad, is that he takes at face value whoever's talking to him. The exception being how willing he is to act as a collaborative media apologist for the Trump administration. But then even that, I think that's about personal relationships rather than wanting access to power or influence. I think it's that he met Trump a couple of times and has him on the phone. He's talked about how he texts him sometimes. And he knows Vance and talks about what a good guy he is. He knows RFK. Yeah. He knows people in the Trump orbit and he wants to help his boys out, essentially. And if my opinions change much, maybe it's in recognizing a lot of Joe's problems are how loyal he is to a specific circle of people.
Yeah.
How bad he is at choosing who should be in that circle, and how much he's willing to throw out in the name of that loyalty.
Yeah. Good analysis. I thought I saw a comment from somewhere, and I don't remember where I saw it. It was one of the comments on one of the episodes that we did, where someone who wasn't a listener to the show listened to the beginning, and I had said something like, I'm not sure whether Joe believes this, but I don't think it matters because of the damage that it can do, is what I said.
Yeah.
And they had essentially discounted the entire podcast, said, what's the purpose of the podcast if you don't know whether he's lying or not? And I thought, well, I don't think anybody can know whether he's lying or not except for Joe Rogan. Like you can't just divine whether Joe Rogan is lying about certain things. You can make a guess, and it can be a very educated guess, but I can't 100% know whether or not Joe is lying or just mistaken on most of the things that he does. I think a lot of people really want an easy answer. That's what they want. They want that Saul of Tarsus moment where he turns into, something else. Joe, they'll say things. I'll see things that dismiss this all the time. They'll say, Joe's in it for the money. Joe's a shill. Joe just wants audience share. Joe is a far right-wing guy who's pretending to not be. When I've mentioned this show to other people, and I've said things like, yeah, this is the show that I do, I can't tell you how many times people have said, oh, well, that's probably a pretty easy show to do. Debunking Joe, that's a pretty easy show to do. I've heard people say that, right? Because I think to them, they have a simple answer. They have an easy answer. I think it's a lot more complicated than a very simple answer. I think Joe, there's a combination of contrarianism, his views on how he collects information, his confirmation bias guides him sort of where he's going to be. And so I think that those are probably the biggest forces in Joe's life that push him down his path. And those things collect a lot of bad stuff. And that bad stuff happens to be people who think that they can manipulate him. And we've seen that happen with billionaires. We've seen that happen with politicians. And they're actively doing it while we watch them do it. I am not convinced that Joe is in on some of those takes. I think some people are clearly manipulating him for his reach. And but I don't think it's as easy an answer as, is he stupid or is he evil? I don't know that I would be able to speculate on whether or not he's evil. I think though, if you were to ask me if he believes some of the stuff that he says, I would say I think he does. I think he does believe it. I think he's a believer.
Yeah, I think so too. And on that point about whether it's easy to debunk Joe Rogan, the shows where we've gone off-piste and we've gone to Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens are easier to do.
Much easier.
They are so far off, so far away from reality. The problem with Joe is that I think he does believe a lot of the stuff, and so that kind of anchors it more to reality and makes it much harder to.
Yeah,
it's closer to the mainstream. Kimmerfest asks, have you listened to the Rogan versus Maher episodes of the I Hate Bill Maher podcast? All my podcasts are colliding, and I love it.
I haven't actually. I don't know the podcast existed, but I do hate Bill Maher, so I am 100% for that podcast.
Yeah. I've not listened to it either. And to be honest, Bill Maher has so little crossover influence here in the UK that it wouldn't occur to me to seek out someone debunking or complaining about Bill Maher because he's just so nothingness here in the UK. But maybe it's something we'll revisit in the future as to whether we should be looking at something Bill Maher's done.
I will check it out on our break. So thank you for the tip. Condition Gamer asks, what do you guys do for self-care after these episodes?
Yeah, see, that's tricky. I mean, I carry on my other job of being a full-time professional skeptic. So I edit articles for the Skeptic magazine. I write to government regulators and politicians. I investigate weird corners of woo to present on Skeptics with the K. I host our local Skeptics in the Pub event. So not a great deal of self-care in there. I think I've always been like a change is as good as a rest kind of guy instead. It's like I'll just switch topics slightly and that's refreshing to me.
Well, after we record, I edit the show and then I proof the show and then I post the show. So when I'm done recording, I'm not done, right? So I'm like, I've got a lot of extra stuff to do after that point. So I'm still stuck in Joe until Saturday midday. Most of the time I'll get the show posted. Sometimes I'll post it on Friday. But yeah, so I'm still stuck in Joe until then. But most of the time I will not listen to Joe until Monday, unless we're doing another extra show in which I have to listen to him over the weekend. So I don't get much of a break. But when I do get a break, I like to step away from it, man. Woof.
Yeah, I mean, I think normally I start listening to the next episode on the Thursday or the Friday. So like we record on the Wednesday, I'm already into the next one by the Thursday or Friday to get a head start on it. So yeah, not great. Theo asks, how profitable is this show and what has the listenership growth been compared to your other projects?
This listenership is smaller than my other projects, but it is a good listenership and it's growing, which is great. If you want to help this show grow, one of the best ways that you can do it is if you happen to see one of your favorite podcasters happens to be talking about Joe Rogan and you're on their Reddit or you're in their comments or whatever, you can also mention that we are in that sphere too. And hopefully we can maybe do a crossover episode where we might be a guest on someone else's show to talk about this show to their audience who is obviously interested in Joe Rogan. That's a great way to help spread the show. So if you're interested in helping spread the show, obviously leaving comments about this show in other places as well as rating us is always a huge deal. When it comes to profitability, I won't share a ton of data about my life, but I will point out that that I was, before I became a full-time podcaster, I was a person who worked full-time in higher ed. And if you're in higher ed in the United States, you know that that's a pretty modest salary that you get with higher ed. You don't get, you're not rolling in the fatty banks when you work in higher ed. Most of the time it's the benefits to keep you there. And the benefits kept me at my job for a long time. I worked there for a long time, but I had a pretty modest salary when I worked there. And I did about 35 hours of work a week there. That was what I was paid to do, was about 35 hours a week. And I do about 35 hours of work for this show every week. It's 3 full days plus 2 half days. So it's about 32 to 35 hours depending. And if there's more tossed in because we do bonus shows. And I make far less than I did at a modest salary. So I would say that profitability monetarily is not as much as I was making before, but sense of accomplishment with the work and spreading this message is really important to me. So I think that that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think obviously this is a tricky question to answer, but I'm happy to sort of share some stuff around it. Like I'm really pleased with the size of the listenership. This is the most listened to podcast that I've done, that I'm one of the hosts of. But it's also quite a niche, really, in the listenership is people who care enough about Rogan to want to understand him, but don't believe him and don't want to listen to him. So like there's already kind of a niche going on in there. We're not going to be doing an arena tour anytime soon, but I think we're reaching the people that we want to be reaching, and we always want to be reaching more. As for profitability, like as you say, it's less than a job would pay me for the experience and the expertise that I have. But I'm also happy that it makes enough for our effort to be worthwhile.
Yeah.
We couldn't carry it on without that
either. Like I'm very grateful. So yes.
Yeah, exactly. And like I also have a full-time job, and in the 17 years that I've been a podcaster, the other shows that I've hosted weren't monetized. So this is definitely more profitable than those shows. But I didn't get into podcasting for the sweet moolah. So it's
not
all
many
fine.
people do, it turns out.
No, these days they fucking do. Like Jesus Christ, they do.
I will say, did you see Bongino in that article the article that's linked in this show notes? Bongino is complaining because he left millions of dollars on the podcasting table. Millions of dollars. Yeah. That's not a thing that neither Marsh or I could say. So
no, there's a reason that celebrities and comedians, people are rushing into the podcasting space for where they can make the money out of it.
But I don't want to seem ungrateful. I am very grateful to our audience and the people who support us. I was just asked a very pointed question, so I answered in a way. I don't want to come off as flippant, though. Okay, so Thomas says, so far you guys have done Brett Weinstein twice now. Both are beautiful, but is there a chance that you guys can cover his brother, Eric?
Yeah, I'd say there almost certainly is. We keep a list of target shows. Keeping that list keeping that list fully up to date is tricky because Joe keeps putting out so many new episodes, and we got to keep going back in. Eric is on our targeted list. It's just a case of finding the right episode where there's enough of something interesting in it to make it shine as an episode.
Wasn't he the one though that said that he knew Epstein? Maybe we could find an Epstein link in there.
Yeah, there's an Epstein link. He also has like a theory of the universe, like a theory of new mathematics that changes
like
how everybody looks at maths and science. So like
he also
he's one
was
of those folks.
on the show with Terrence Howard. So he and Terrence Howard did a debunking episode. I don't know if that's going to be worth it, but we might want to look into it. So.
Yeah, but Eric's going to make an appearance at some show at some point. I'm absolutely sure of it. Kelly Eckersley asks, probably completely hypothetical, but if you guys got an invitation onto Rogan, a la Brian Dunning, would you take it?
No, but he can come on our show. I would have him on our show if he wants to come on our show.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, but only if he comes to my house in Liverpool and he sits right here in my office with me. And he should get that because he wouldn't travel for Kamala Harris. So we should have to travel for Rogan.
That's true. I would travel and I would sit next to him very closely. I would be very close. I would lean in. Ian, no, not that one, says, what's your favorite food that you don't get to enjoy often and why? It's expensive, it's hard to find, it's a pain to prepare, etc.
So I'm awful at answering questions like this because the moment these questions get asked, every single food stuff I actually like just drops right out of my brain and I cannot think of anything at all. But I'm going to say really good sushi, mostly because I can't make that at home. There's not a place where I can get the good ingredients. I don't quite know what I'm doing. So like I wouldn't do that well, and I don't go to my favorite Japanese restaurant often enough here in Liverpool. If you're ever in Liverpool, Etsu is the best Japanese restaurant in Liverpool. Is great. That's the place to get sushi, but I don't do it often enough. So yeah, I'm going to say sushi.
I'm going to say soccer tort. Every commercial version I've ever had of this cake is bad. I even had it at the Soccer Hotel in Vienna when this was, 2 decades ago, but I had it there and it was pretty bad. It was pretty terrible. If it's made properly, it is absolutely the king of cakes. It is delicious and wonderful. It's a lot of work to do. So, and I'm a pastry chef and I don't even like to do it. So I don't make it very often, but it's one of my favorite cakes, soccer tort.
Yeah, I can't hear Sakatort except to the tune of Last Resort by Papa Roach. Cut my pie into pieces. This is my Sakatort.
Amazing.
Every single time.
Amazing. I'm going to sing that every time I make it, by the way, from now on.
Absolutely do.
I will. I'm stealing that.
So Aram Dulian, who I think is the same Aram who was offering some technical perspectives on the video earlier, Aram asks, Joe likes to call himself a centrist or even centre-left. A lot of his views aren't inherently right-wing in nature, despite being advanced mainly by right-wing people. They're just generic conspiratorial beliefs. He'd also point out how much he agrees with Bernie Sanders on fundamentally left-wing concerns like social safety nets or wealth inequality. Do you think it's still fair to call Rogan right-wing? And how would you make that argument, especially if you were making it directly to Joe?
I don't think you can endorse a fully right-wing candidate and not be right-wing. I don't think you can hold on to the dominant right-wing political theory, which is the Great Replacement theory, and not be right-wing. You have to agree with their positions, and I think Joe does. I think Joe would call himself politically homeless or not affiliated because he doesn't want to have the criticism that comes with being someone who is right-wing. But Joe also gets most of his news from right-wing Twitter and literally reads right-wing tweets out aloud as if it's some sort of gotcha. So I don't think you can immerse yourself in that stream and not come out right-wing.
Yeah, exactly. I think if he doesn't call himself right-wing, it's because he lacks self-awareness or lacks self-analysis. And for me, it's what I said about RFK Jr., okay? They might espouse a range of values that seem to come from different parts of the political spectrum, but when the chips are down and it's a choice between one path or another, you just look at which values they ditch and which they prioritize.
Yeah, yes.
For RFK, his anti-vax views took precedent over his economic justice views. The second he had the opportunity to curtail vaccines, he stopped talking about the wealth inequality stuff. And Joe similar, he talks about freedom and not trusting the government, but then he shows us that if ICE are catching the people he dislikes, he's willing to let them shoot a few people he disagrees with. So where are his values there? He's willing to be spied on at all times as long as his candidate is the one doing the spying and his billionaire friend gets the contract to do that spying. on wealth inequality. Joe would say he cares a lot about wealth inequality, and yet he will have Mark Andreessen on the show and not talk about the role of billionaires in the economy.
Yeah.
He'll have Elon Musk on the show, who is now a trillionaire, and that won't come up. So when the chips are down, he just drops the things, the values that he was wearing, that I think in the moments he talks about them, he does believe in those things. But when he's forced to choose, he will favor the right-wing talking points every single time.
Steiny 45255 asks, of the episodes you guys have suffered through so far, what one would you think is the most harmful?
Was that a screen name or an age range? It's Steiny 45 to 55. That's the age range that he's in the demographic box that he's in.
45 to 55.
No, it's good.
Yeah, that's
we get
true.
to do our demographic
Yeah, maybe
survey
it's
of
our
our
demographic.
listeners at the same time.
Nice catch there, Mark.
Steiny in the 45 to 55 demographic asks, I think it's really hard to ask, because how do you compare harm, right? Is it the one-off moment within the show that is absolutely wildly egregious? Is it like a whole show that is bad? Or is it that, like I mentioned before, the bubbling repetition of falsehoods over and over again on show after show after show until they're just considered facts? I don't know how you disambiguate which of those is the most harmful. Like HIV denial is going to kill people.
Yeah.
Vaccine denial is going to kill people. Are those more or less harmful than embedding extreme anti-feminist misogyny, as he did with the Wilsons, or giving cover to anti-immigrant hate, like he has again and again the Great Replacement Theory? I don't know. I can't weigh those things up against each other.
I do want to point out that I think Steiny, that name, is a Homestar Runner reference for Strong Bad email, as I recall. So it's an old reference.
Wow.
I think, and it might even be
If it's
the
an old
username
reference,
of the
they
person
really
who
are in the
sent
45 to
in.
55 demographic.
Yeah, you'd have to be 45 in order to understand the reference. Okay, so I would say the episodes where Joe platforms politicians and then never asks a single hard question and never pushes back. Donald Trump, RFK, JD Vance, he pushed back way more against Bernie Sanders than he did against any of those three. He pushed back against James Tallarico more than he did to those three. I think that he sane-washed all those right-wing talking points and he put them into the mainstream and made it seem like he was having a reasonable conversation when literally he was just a propaganda session for any of those people. So I think those are really dangerous because they give people the illusion that there's some sort of, some sort of give and take and someone's asking him the hard questions and he wasn't asking any hard questions at all.
The Stunt Lady asks, in the past, Joe has talked about himself as one of the last remaining real comedians. Have either of you ever watched any of his stand-up specials or seen his comedy work? And if so, what did you think of it?
I've seen clips of him. I've never watched a full episode of his comedy, but I don't really see Joe as a comedian, to be honest. I see him as a storyteller. I think he's a podcaster. I think he's a TV host. I think all those things are true. But from what I've seen, he's terrible at recognizing jokes when they're told to him or when someone is clearly kidding on his show. He's really bad at improv. If someone is funny on his show, there's not a lot of building of anything. He doesn't build with his guests in an improv sort of way. It's just a lot of no buts. And so that's a terrible improv. So he doesn't have that skill. I think pretty much his stand-up is just him talking about cum and humping a stool. So to be honest, I haven't seen any of his comedy that I thought was even remotely funny. So I don't see him as a comedian myself.
Yeah, I mean, I've not sought out any of his comedy specials yet. We did talk about maybe covering it for a bonus show at some point, but they wouldn't really make for an interesting analysis here's a guy telling a joke that wasn't a very good joke. So yeah, I can't talk about the quality of his crafted material.
If everyone was just like, we play his joke and then we're like, that wasn't very good. And then we went on to the next
Just the next one. Yeah.
We should do that for the April Fool's episode. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, so easy to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't talk about the quality of his crafted material. I can say, as you say, it's incredibly rare that he says anything on his show that has the form or structure of a joke.
Yeah.
Or something that's surprising that makes you laugh in an unexpected way, as like spontaneous jokes might. And he talks a lot about the writing process and being visited by the muse and how like when it comes, you just got to sit right until you get it right, until you get the wording of it right. But we just don't see any of that in his podcast at all. my impression of the comic style he has from just what we've seen on this show and the things that he like brings up that he thinks are funny, it feels like he's got the instinct for what counts as material that is very similar to a high school bully.
That's a good
Of
point.
like,
Yeah.
look at
think
what
so.
this person's like, and this woman was like, meh, 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 meh. It's like, it just seems like that kind of stuff, like the kind of stuff your bully would pick out as funny.
For Deuce asks, knowing Joe's affinity for drug use, is it something you take into account when reviewing his shows?
Yeah, I don't really, not at all. I don't actually know how into drugs Joe is compared to how he used to be, because he doesn't really smoke weed with guests on the show anymore. He doesn't talk about smoking weed that much anymore. He certainly used to. We don't see a great deal of that. He's not really as much into drinking. He talks about it now and again, but he doesn't seem to like be a heavy drinker. When he talks about psychedelic usage, I don't think that really impacts on the content of the show. It feels like historic stuff rather than like he's not taking LSD or taking mushrooms and then coming on the show and doing it. So I don't think it's actually affecting the arguments that he's making or the positions that he's holding. And there's occasionally he'll be clearly drunk talking to some comedians, but those tend not to be shows that are worth us covering anyway because they're not as coherent.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
Kyle Jenkins says, I'd love to hear an episode or even a clip show of times that Joe has lost a debate or was out of control of the conversation and how he handled himself.
So I don't know if we're going to cover it, but there is a clip that I'm going to put in this week's show notes for Joe talking to a primatologist. Joe loses his shit on a call-in show. I think it was Tim and Eric or Dave and Anthony or one of these. I don't know. It's like it's two guy names, whatever the two
Opie and
guys
Anthony.
are. A couple of knuckleheads in the morning. He's on their show, and he's talking to someone who happens to be calls in and says they're a primatologist, and he loses his shit, gets mad because they laugh at him, and at the end, he ends the entire call with, "Oh, look at me, I'm so smart, I have a vagina." So that's how he ends the call. So, I mean, if you can't say that's a loss, I mean, that's the biggest L anybody's ever taken. So it's a great clip to listen to, and it's actually time-stamped for that very specific section of tape.
Right, gotcha. Yeah, and honestly, I think Joe losing it and losing control of the conversation, I think we saw that in the Phil Plate conversation on Penn Jillette, the first one. But we didn't really cover it as much. We mentioned it in the show, but we couldn't really play a clip of it because it didn't clip up well because it's like a 20-minute block where Joe is just getting more agitated over time. Like the latter half of that first show, Joe realized he's not making any of the ground that he was expecting to make it to be dead easy, and he starts to spiral. It doesn't clip up as easy. So if you do go in and try and find, I forget where we found it this time around, the first appearance of Phil Plate, the last half of that show is Joe doing exactly this.
Yeah, he's angry. And as he's talking, he's getting higher pitched and faster talking, and he won't let Phil have any kind of point. So it's real interesting to watch him. So he does lose it in those conversations. He genuinely loses it. We had a bunch of people comment, and they said, "Man, he really seems like he's just losing it in this episode." It's more than what we put out on tape for sure. Leon asks, of the goals you had when you originally started this podcast, which have you accomplished? What are your aspirations for next season?
So, yeah, in terms of goals, I think we've got to know a fair bit about how Joe Rogan ticks and like what his motivations, at least at a superficial level, are. I wouldn't say I know like his psyche perfectly to understand all his motivations, but I get a sense of like what motivates him, what drives the kind of conversations he has, the guests that he has, what directions they're going to go. I think we've got a sense of that. We set out to try and understand beyond the headlines and the sound bites. So the bits that are going viral, what actually is it like, and are these reflective of the full tenor of the show? So that when the media were, for example, going wild about how Joe is breaking from Trump over those ICE raids, we were able to prove, no, he isn't. And here's some evidence to that. So that absolutely is part of the goal of the show. And I think we're achieving that with shows like that.
I think in some ways we might have not achieved some of the goals we started out with. And I think initially we had an idea that one of the things we'd like to do is be as fair as possible and try to reach as many Joe Rogan listeners as possible by not saying things that would be offensive to those people that might lead them in. I don't think that we've accomplished that. In fact, I think it's been too hard for either of us to stay on that path because there's so many things that are so wrong and so against our values that we can't just be quiet about these things and let them pass. We have to have a conversation about them, and we have to talk about why we think they're wrong. So I don't think that that that's something that we have achieved, and I don't think it's anything we're going to revisit. I don't care about that specific segment of the audience, even if it could be a very large segment of the audience. It's not something that I would try to reach for in the future. I think that we've hit a good stride about where our values live and how we approach Joe Rogan. And I don't want to change that about who we are and what we put out every week.
I think that's fair. I think I don't want to actively alienate them, but I think it's hard to court them, not least because, it's hard to avoid saying things that will upset or offend them, because it's really easy to find something that will upset or offend them. And there are people who, even in the opening lines of one of our shows, will say, well, you weren't perfectly fair to Joe Rogan in that first line, or the tone of your voice was out, and so I'm checking out at this point. Is that, well, you were never going to listen.
Yeah,
like you were listening
anyway.
to the first moment that upset you and you left. We can't do anything to keep you here with us.
Yeah. I also would like to see, I think if you're talking about goals for the future, I think that I'd like to reach into the broader Roganverse, which is what we're going to be doing in the next season with the bonus shows and maybe with a show or two in the regular feed, because I think it's so important to understand the ecosystem he's swimming in. So catching on to more Tucker shows and things like that might also help us understand the things that he's listening to, because we know he listens to these people. We know he listens to Tucker Carlson. We know he listens to Candace Owens. We know he listens to Dave Smith. So those are people I'd like to pay attention to see where he's getting his ideas from.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave Egan asks, there were rumors that CBS were going after Rogan to present 60 Minutes. Do you think he'd make the jump to mainstream media?
Not a chance. I don't think that he doesn't have any journalistic ability. What would he do on 60 Minutes? He's not going to break a case. He's not going to find anything out. He would just hump a stool and tell people how to extract Donkey Kong or something. There's nothing he's going to do on 60 Minutes that would be even remotely in line with anything 60 Minutes has done in the 50 years it's existed.
Yeah, if there was any kind of scandal in the bow hunting community about particular bows,
they need
maybe
to platform
he'd be
a
on
billionaire. That would work, right?
Yeah,
For sure.
yeah, exactly. I think the thing is Joe sees himself as this consummate outsider, kind of the jester who can speak truth to power, who's outside of the system. I don't think he'd ever be able to reconcile that with actually being in the mainstream, even a perverted form of the mainstream that CBS is under Barry Weiss et al. I think even that, Joe just couldn't reconcile who he is with being part of something as big as that.
Tinkersdam asks, Marsh, could we please meet Mildred?
I wish I could do that. Mildred very much plays by her own rules, so I cannot anticipate or in any way control when or where she makes an appearance.
Yeah.
The thing is, she does often pop in during our recording sessions, but it's normally during the off-the-record segments, which aren't on camera, because that's the time she's starting to get hungry, so she starts to jump on the table in front of me and walk backwards and forwards and rub against the microphone.
Yeah.
But it's all in the off-camera stuff. So at some point, I will try and lure her onto a live recording. Yogurt is the key. You open a pot of yogurt, and she is there immediately, regardless where she is in the house. You can hear her thumping around the house to get there as fast as possible. Loves yogurt.
So I promise I will try to get my two cats, Biscuits and Gravy, in the recording area, but I will apologize in advance. They are the loudest cats I've ever had. They sound like somebody who isn't particularly good at bagpipes. That's what they sound like. They are real.
That's all bagpipes.
I was just going to say, it's pretty much all bagpipes, but one or two people can sometimes bang out a tune on those. These guys can't. They sound terrible and they scream all the time. So my house is constantly filled with the echoes of cats screaming, but I will try to leave the door open one time. Maybe they'll walk in and out, but they will definitely interrupt us. That is for sure. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We are going to be releasing two non-patrons. We are going to be releasing a couple of off-the-record segments over the next couple of weeks. To patrons of all levels, we've been releasing a couple of bonus episodes that we previously released in the last season. And to patrons at a higher level, they will be getting the actual two bonus segments that we are going to be producing this month. One this month, one early next month. We're going to be taking days off. We plan on having these shows shows post while we're off. We'll be coming back on the 28th of July, but there will be stuff posted in between. There may be 1 or 2 weeks off in there, but we're going to try to recruit, and we're going to come back. Our first show will post on the 28th of July, back for the new season for season 4. But stay tuned to the feed, because if you didn't get one of these off the record segments and you're on the wide feed and you want to hear what it's like, you'll get an opportunity to hear what it's like. You get an opportunity to hear what our bonus shows are like. And our other patrons will get a chance to hear a couple of brand new bonus shows that will get posting this upcoming time. But Marsh, as usual, it was a blast doing the show with you. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. You too, man. This has been good. And I look forward to season 4 once we've had a break.
If you love the show, please rate and share it. If you want to get in touch with us, become a patron, or check out the show notes, go to knowrogan.com, KNOWROGAN.com.